Pack your things and be gone by Friday. We don't need dead weight in this company." Sylvie didn't flinch. She'd learned not to. Somewhere between the third boardroom dismissal and the fifth time her ideas had been credited to someone else, she stood in the glass-walled office on the 32nd floor of the Hartwell Group building in downtown Toronto. The kind of office that looked expensive because it was. And she kept her hands very still at her sides. Garrett Hartwell, the man who'd hired her 4 years ago, promoted her twice, and was now looking at her the way people look at a coffee stain on a white shirt, leaned back in his chair and let the silence do the rest of the work. There were 12 people in that room, a board meeting that had somehow turned into a public execution. Sylvie had walked in with a proposal, a 3-year expansion plan for Hartwell's Western Division, something she'd spent 6 months building from scratch, nights at her kitchen table in her apartment on Bloor Street, weekends without sleep, spreadsheets she could recite by memory. She'd walked in with a folder and walked into something else entirely. "The projections don't hold," Garrett said, sliding her proposal back across the table like it had offended him. "The risk model is unsophisticated. I expected more from someone at your level." What he didn't say, but what everyone in the room understood, was that the proposal was being killed because Garrett's nephew had submitted a competing version 2 days earlier. Sylvie knew this. The 12 people in the room knew this. The nephew, a 26-year-old named Preston, who'd never spent a weekend working a day in his life, sat 2 chairs to Garrett's left and looked very carefully at the table. "Your contract runs through Q3, Garrett continued. "But given the current restructuring, we're moving things up. HR will be in touch." Sylvie picked up her folder. She said, "Thank you for your time." She walked out. The elevator ride down was 32 floors, and she counted every one of them. The lobby smelled like the same floor polish it always smelled like. The security guard at the desk, a man named Arthur who'd learned her coffee order 2 years ago and asked after her every single morning, looked up when she came through and read something in her face before she could arrange it into something else. "Rough day?" he said. "Getting there," she said. Outside, King Street was doing what King Street always does in October. Blowing cold from the lake, people moving fast with their collars up, nobody making eye contact. Sylvie stood on the sidewalk with her folder and her coat and 4 years of work and let the wind hit her. She didn't cry. She thought about crying. She decided against it. She walked to the coffee shop on the corner and ordered a tea she didn't really want and sat by the window and opened her folder and looked at the expansion plan she'd spent 6 months building. It was good. She knew it was good. The numbers were right, the logic was clean, the risk model, unsophisticated, Garrett had called it, was actually more conservative than anything Hartwell Group had published in 3 years. She knew that too. She closed the folder. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from her mother, which she'd deal with later, and a text from her friend Justine that said only, "Heard something. Call me when you can." Justine worked in commercial real estate. She heard things constantly, most of them useless, some of them not. Sylvie didn't call her back. Not yet. She finished the tea she didn't want, and she thought about what comes next. Which is what you do when the thing you built for 4 years gets handed to a 26-year-old who'd never had a sleepless Sunday in his life. What comes next, she decided, was this. She was going to use every hour of the notice period they owed her. She was going to clear her desk on her own timeline. She was going to walk out of the Hartwell Group building one last time, with her head exactly where it always was. And she was going to finish something she'd been quietly working on for 8 months. Something she'd told no one about. Not Justine, not her mother, not the colleague she trusted most. Because some things you keep close until they're ready. And this one wasn't ready yet. But it was close. The apartment on Bloor was a 1-bedroom with a radiator that knocked at 3 in the morning, and a view of the alley behind the building which Sylvie had come to find oddly comforting. She'd moved there when she first got the Hartwell job, thinking it was temporary, thinking she'd upgrade once things settled. Things hadn't settled. She'd stopped noticing the radiator. The alley had a maple tree at one end that turned extraordinary colors every October, and she'd learned to consider it a luxury. She sat at her kitchen table that night with her laptop and a bowl of soup she kept forgetting to eat, and a document she'd been building since February. Not a proposal, not a pitch deck, a company. The paperwork for it anyway. The legal structure, the financial model, the partnership agreements, the market analysis. 8 months of early mornings and late nights, and a very good business lawyer named Helena, who charged by the hour and had once told Sylvie, in the dry way that good lawyers speak, that she had seen a lot of plans in her career. And this one was not a bad one. Helena was not a woman who said things she didn't mean. The plan was this: a logistics consulting firm targeting mid-size manufacturers across Ontario and the western provinces who were being underserved by the large firms. Firms like Hartwell Group, which had grown too big to care about clients under a certain revenue threshold. Sylvie had spent 4 years watching those clients get handed to junior analysts and given template solutions that didn't fit their actual problems. She knew their names. She'd sent some of them cards when their contracts ended, kept in touch on the margins, asked after their operations. 2 of them had, over the past 3 months, told her quietly that if she ever went out on her own, they'd like to talk. She had the legal structure. She had the financial model. She had the beginning of a client list that was small but serious. What she had not had until this week was the forcing function that makes a person stop preparing and actually begin. Garrett Hartwell had given her that, without meaning to. She ate the soup. She worked until midnight. The radiator knocked at 3 and she was still awake, running numbers. And she turned it off and kept working. She spent her last 2 weeks at Hartwell Group, doing exactly what she'd said she would do. She came in on time. She finished what she'd been assigned. She documented her processes carefully, not as a favor to the company, but because she was the kind of person who finishes things properly. Preston watched her from across the floor, with the look of someone who'd expected more drama, and was disappointed by the absence of it. On her last day, a Wednesday, Arthur the security guard shook her hand at the lobby and said, "You're going to be fine." "I know," Sylvie said. She meant it, which surprised her a little. The office she rented for the first 3 months was not really an office. It was a shared workspace on Queen West. One of those industrial brick converted buildings with exposed pipes and a coffee bar and people in hoodies working on things that may or may not ever exist. Sylvie found it irritating and then found it oddly energizing, and eventually stopped thinking about it at all. She registered the company in November. Solway Advisory. The name came from a lake she'd read about once, in a novel she'd half remembered, and she liked the sound of it. Steady, not flashy, like something that had been there a while. Helena filed the incorporation papers on a Tuesday morning and texted Sylvie a photo of the confirmation. "Congratulations," Helena wrote. "Now the hard part." The hard part was getting clients. Sylvie knew this going in. The 2 manufacturers who'd expressed interest were encouraging but not yet committed. And interest is not a contract. She reached out carefully, methodically, not with the anxious energy of someone who needed the yes, but with the patient attention of someone who had thought very carefully about what she was offering and why it was worth their time. She'd watched enough bad sales pitches at Hartwell to know what they looked like, and she'd resolved never to make one. The first contract came in 6 weeks after incorporation. A mid-size auto parts manufacturer in Brampton, family-owned, 3rd generation, being squeezed on both ends by supply chain disruptions, they didn't have the internal capacity to navigate. Sylvie had met the operations manager at an industry event 2 years earlier and sent him a card when his father retired. She called him now and he answered on the second ring and said, "I was wondering when you'd reach out." The contract was modest. It covered 3 months of work, and it was exactly what she could do well, which was the point. The second came in January, a food processing company in Hamilton. The third in February. By March, Solway Advisory had 4 active clients, 2 junior consultants Sylvie had hired on contract, and more work than she could comfortably manage, which was the kind of problem she'd been hoping for. She was working 16-hour days and sleeping badly, and eating too much takeout from the Thai place on the corner, and she had never, not once in those months, felt the particular flatness that had settled over her during the last year at Hartwell Group. She told Justine this one evening over dinner at the wine bar on Ossington. Justine listened, nodded, and said, "You know what I heard last week?" Sylvie looked up. "Hartwell Group lost the Morrison consolidated account," Justine said. "The Western expansion plan fell apart." "Preston." She said the name with a certain careful flatness. apparently presented the wrong version of the projections to the board. The risk model was wrong. Sylvie was quiet for a moment. That's unfortunate, she said. It gets more unfortunate, Justine said. Morrison Consolidated is looking for a new consulting firm. I heard they specifically asked about boutique options, firms with senior talent. A pause. Sylvie. Morrison Consolidated is worth about $8 million in consulting fees annually. Sylvie set down her glass. She had thought about Morrison Consolidated. She had thought about them carefully and had decided they were too large for where Solway was right now, and that chasing them before the firm was ready would be a mistake. She still believed that. She also believed that if Morrison came looking, that was a different situation entirely. Who's their operations lead? She asked. Woman named Paula, Justine said. Apparently she's the one asking around. Sylvie nodded slowly. I think I have Paula's card, she said. The meeting with Paula was not a sales pitch. Sylvie had been clear about that when she'd reached out. She wanted a conversation, not a presentation. They met for lunch at a restaurant downtown, a place Sylvie had chosen because it was quiet enough to talk in and didn't try too hard. And for an hour and a half, they discussed the logistic town challenges facing manufacturers in the current environment. Transportation bottlenecks, cross-border complications, the particular difficulty of operating between Ontario and Alberta in an era of regulatory inconsistency. Sylvie didn't talk about Solway Advisory for most of the lunch. She talked about the problems. She'd learned through 4 years of watching people do it wrong that the best way to sell a solution is to make sure the person across the table feels completely understood before you mention that you have one. Paula was sharp, practical, a little impatient in the way that capable people often are. She'd been dealing with consultants her entire career, and she had the look of someone who could identify a template solution at 40 paces. Near the end of lunch, she said, I've looked at your firm. You're small, we are, Sylvie said. Hartwell Group is large and they made a mess of our account. They're better at certain kinds of work than others, Sylvie said carefully. Your situation is actually a good fit for a smaller firm. You'd have senior attention on every file, not a junior analyst with a template. Paula looked at her for a long moment. Can you handle our scale? She asked. Not right now, at full scope, Sylvie said. I want to be honest with you about that. What I'd propose is starting with the Western distribution problem. That's the most urgent piece, and building from there if it goes the way I think it will. Another pause. Most people would have told me yes to the whole thing, Paula said. Most people would have been wrong, Sylvie said. Paula smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that means something. Send me a proposal, she said. Sylvie sent the proposal that weekend. She spent 2 days on it, not because it was complicated. She'd been thinking about Morrison Consolidated's Western distribution problem for 3 months. Ever since Justine first mentioned the account was in trouble, but because she wanted it to be exactly right. Not impressive, right? The distinction mattered. Paula responded on Monday. She had questions. Sylvie answered them. Paula had more questions. Sylvie answered those too, and she answered them without the particular anxious speed that signals someone who needs the contract badly. Because she had learned that the worst negotiating position you can be in is needing something. The contract was signed on a Thursday in early April. It was not $8 million. It was a 6-month engagement with specific deliverables and an option to expand, and it was the largest contract Solway Advisory had signed, larger than the other 4 combined. Sylvie was at her kitchen table when the signed copy came through. The radiator was quiet. The maple tree in the alley below had the first pale edges of new leaves. She looked at the confirmation email for a long time, and then she made a cup of tea. Real tea, the good kind, not the kind she ordered when she didn't know what else to do. And she sat by the window and drank it. She thought about the day on King Street in October, standing on the sidewalk with her folder and the wind off the lake. She thought about the folder. She thought about Garrett Hartwell calling her risk model unsophisticated, while his nephew sat 2 chairs to his left and looked at the table. She thought, the most dangerous person in the room is never the one making the most noise. She didn't find out about Garrett until Justine called her on a Friday morning in May. Are you sitting down? Justine said. Tell me. Hartwell Group is restructuring, Justine said. Major restructuring. They lost 3 more accounts after Morrison. Apparently, the Western expansion plan was the thing holding a lot of client confidence together, and when it fell apart, it took some other things with it. The board met last week. A pause. Garrett is stepping down. Sylvie was standing at the coffee bar in the shared workspace on Queen West. Around her, people in hoodies worked on things that may or may not ever exist. When, she said. End of month, Justine said. And Sylvie, apparently there's been some conversation about who should come in to help with the restructuring. The board is looking at external consultants. The quiet that followed was not the quiet of surprise. It was the quiet of someone who needs a moment to think carefully about something. I'm not interested in going back, Sylvie said. No, Justine said. I know that. I'm saying they may call you, in a professional capacity. Sylvie set down her coffee. If they call, she said, I'll listen, and I'll charge appropriately. They called. A board member named Clifford, who'd been in the room on that October morning, and had looked at the table, not at Garrett. When Sylvie had been told to pack her things, he called on a Tuesday, and he was careful and somewhat formal, and he said that the board was aware of the work Solway Advisory had been doing, and that they were considering their options for the restructuring process. Sylvie listened. She said, I appreciate the call, Clifford. I want to be honest with you. I have capacity concerns right now, and I'd need to understand the full scope before I could give you any kind of commitment. Clifford said he understood. She said she'd need a proper briefing, not a phone call, and that if the scope matched what Solway could genuinely handle well, she was open to a conversation. Clifford said he'd arrange it. The briefing was in the same building on King Street. 32nd floor. The lobby still smelled like floor polish. Arthur was at the desk, and he looked up when she came in and something shifted in his face. You're back, he said. Visiting, she said. You need a badge? I think they're expecting me. He smiled like someone who understood the shape of what was happening without knowing the details. The boardroom was the same boardroom. The glass walls, the view of King Street below, the table with the 12 chairs. 4 board members this time, no Garrett, no Preston. Clifford at the head, 3 others she recognized from the October meeting. They'd asked for a presentation. She'd sent a message the day before saying she wouldn't be presenting, that she'd prefer a working conversation. They'd agreed. She sat down. She didn't open a folder. Tell me about the actual problem, she said. Not the narrative you've been using publicly, the actual one. The conversation that followed lasted 2.5 hours. By the end of it, Sylvie had a clear picture of what had broken and why, and the board had a clear picture of what Solway Advisory could and could not do, because she'd told them both things with equal directness. She was not there to rescue anyone. She was there to do specific work if the fit was right. The fit was mostly right. The engagement agreement took 3 weeks to negotiate, because Sylvie negotiated carefully, and Solway's lawyer, a junior partner at Helena's firm who had learned to trust Sylvie's instincts, held the line on several points the board initially pushed back on. The final agreement was not what the board had originally proposed. It was better structured, more specific, and significantly more expensive. Clifford signed it on a Thursday afternoon. He said, I should tell you, some of us felt badly about how things ended in October. Sylvie considered that for a moment. I don't need that, she said, not unkindly, but I appreciate you saying it. The story got out, the way stories do in a city that is smaller than it looks. A woman who'd been walked out of Hartwell Group in October was now running the engagement to fix what had broken after she left. People had opinions about this. Most of them, in Sylvie's experience, were wrong in the details but right in the feeling, which is how most people are about most things. Justine texted her a screenshot of something someone had posted on LinkedIn about it and said, You're famous. Sylvie looked at the screenshot for approximately 4 seconds and put her phone face down. She had a deliverable due for Morrison Consolidated on Friday and 2 junior consultants, waiting on her feedback and a call with a prospective client in Calgary at 3 o'clock. She had things to do. In June, Solway Advisory moved out of the shared workspace on Queen West and into a proper office. Not a large one, not a fancy one, but a real one, with walls and a door and a small reception area, and a window that looked south toward the lake. Sylvie stood in the empty space the afternoon before the movers came and thought about the folder she'd walked out of the Hartwell building with in October. The expansion plan. 6 months of work that had been slid back across a table like an insult. She'd thought about that plan sometimes in the month since, thought about what she'd built in it, the logic, the structure, the conservative risk model that wasn't unsophisticated. It was careful, which is a different thing, and she'd been right to be careful, and the month since had proved it. The plan was part of what she'd drawn from when she built Solway's own expansion model. The same thinking, refined, applied to a company she actually owned. Nobody had slid that across a table. Nobody was going to. She stood in the empty office and looked at the lake, a gray strip of it visible between buildings, and she thought, some things take exactly as long as they need to take. No less, no longer. She turned off the light and locked the door, and walked out into the early summer evening, the city warm and loud around her, the lake wind gone for now. The sky still pale at 9 o'clock, the way it only is in June in this part of the world, which is one of the things about Toronto that Sylvie had always loved, the long light of the early summer evenings, the feeling that there's still time, that the day hasn't finished with you yet. She walked home. She had work in the morning.